Hi, I'm Paula Storm. Thanks for joining me today on my YouTube channel. Today I'm really excited to be launching the Slow and Steady Quilt Along, thanks to Free Spirit Fabrics and also Husqvarna Viking. I hope you'll join me in creating this amazing quilt and learning some new skills along the way. I'm going to be using the beautiful Slow and Steady collection by Chula Pink, which is just launched in shops now. So if you would like to grab a fat quarter bundle, that would be perfect for this quilt. I'm also going to be using some shot cotton fabric by Kaffe Fassett. I've chosen the steel colour. I've chosen this colour because I wanted the beautiful bright fabrics from the Slow and Steady collection to really pop. But you could choose a white background, a black background, whatever you choose. The other thing I wanted to show you today is how I created a temporary design wall. A lot of us don't want to or can't put holes in the wall to create a design wall. Or maybe you sew in the kitchen or in the dining room and you don't want to have a permanent design wall on the wall. Well, that's what I'm going to show you today. By using some 3M hooks, I'm going to stick these on the wall, and also they can be moved to other places in the house as well if you decide to change where you're going to be sewing. I really recommend having a design wall. I found it invaluable to be able to step back from the wall and just assess where all the colours are, especially in this quilt because there's such a variety of colours. To be able to step back and really assess where you're going to put each fabric can be really helpful. I really like this Kaffe Fassett design wall fabric that you can buy on the bolt from your local quilt shop, or if you search online, I'm sure you'll be able to find it. This is a flannel fabric and you can just wind it around the pole and pin it on, and you can move it to wherever you need it. What I did was buy 3 meters, cut it in half and sew it together again on the selvage edge. And that's given me the full length of the wall by about 1.5 meters wide. So it's plenty big enough to get an idea of what your quilt's going to look like. Okay, so the next thing I wanted to share with you was how important using a scant 1/4 inch seam is when it comes to piecing your quilt. Now, do you have blocks that look like this? They have extra little ears that stick out here. They don't quite meet in the middle and you end up with a bit of a mess. The reason for that is because you may be using a 1/4 inch foot on your sewing machine. When you use a 1/4 inch foot, the foot is actually slightly narrower than a regular foot. And what that does is it eliminates one of the feed dogs from being used. So when the feed dogs are pulling your fabric through the machine, they actually push them off at an angle. So as well as getting a seam that's not straight, it's never going to be a 1/4 inch. So I like to use my regular A foot that comes with the machine, and I like to move the needle over so that I get a scant 1/4 inch. To do that, all you need to do is find the zigzag setting on your machine. So we're going to leave it in a straight stitch, but we're going to move the needle over to get it close enough to the edge that we can run the fabric up the side of the foot, and we'll get that perfect scant 1/4 inch. Now on this Husqvarna machine, the Husqvarna Viking Designer Epic, we need to move the setting here over to 2.8. And by setting it on 2.8, I can then run my fabric up the side of the foot and I'll get a perfect scant 1/4 inch every time. If you're using a sapphire or an opal, your setting is 2.5. So that's the Husqvarna settings to get a perfect scant 1/4 inch. If you're using a different type of machine, what I would suggest is getting a couple of pieces of fabric. Get a couple of squares. I like to use 2.5 inch squares to start with, and join them together. Then take that fabric and iron it so it's nice and pressed well. Then take your ruler and pop your ruler on top. If that measurement is then 4.5 inches, you've got a perfect scant 1/4 inch. If it's a little bit under 4.5, then you need to move your needle further to the edge of your foot. If it's too big, then you need to move it back towards the center. So just play around with your settings until you get it spot on. Then what I would do, I wouldn't stop there. I would go and make some half square triangle blocks. And so I would sew together the diagonal line and measure the block. You want it to be a perfect 2.5 inches if that's the size of block you're making. If it's not right, again, it's not quite a scant 1/4 inch. So just move that needle a bit further over or back, depending on whether it's too big or too small. Now some of the blocks in the quilt I have oversized so that you can trim them back. Some of the blocks are paper piece, so it doesn't matter at all, but some of them are pieced, and it is quite important to get that scant 1/4 inch seam perfect. So what I'd suggest over the next couple of weeks while you wait for the first blocks to be released, get out some fabric, make a block like this. So you've got 4 half square triangles in the corners, you've got some plain 2.5 inch blocks in the center, and you've got a 1/4 square triangle right in the middle. And by making that block, if it lines up perfectly all around the outside, and if you get those perfect points in the corners, then you know your scant 1/4 inch is right. Make sure you take a note of what the setting is on your machine so that you can easily switch back to it next time. You should only ever have to do this once. Once you know the setting on your machine, if you've got an older machine that's a turn dial, you could even mark it with a Sharpie so that you know where to put that setting. Another thing I'd suggest is pop a new needle in your machine. It doesn't hurt to put in a new needle, and to be honest, they're probably the cheapest thing that you're ever going to use with your sewing machine. So they're cheap to replace, and they do make a big difference when it comes to piecing. You want a nice sharp needle, and you want it to be the right size needle for your fabric. I like to use an 80 for most of my piecing work, and a nice sharp 80. So grab some new needles, pop one in the machine, and while you're at it, why not throw in a new blade in your rotary cutter, which will make your cutting so much easier. So let's go through the requirements. Now I've chosen, as I said before, to use the Tulip Pink collection, Slow and Steady. So I started out with a 1/2 meter bundle, but I think this is what I've got left over, and I think that a fat 1/4 bundle would have been enough for me. Some of the fabrics I preferred, so I used a little bit more. Some of them I liked a bit less, so I didn't use as much of them. But I think a fat 1/4 bundle of Slow and Steady would be perfect. I'd also grab another couple of fat 1/4s of a few different yellows. So I've used, these are from the True Colours collection, and this is a Heather Bailey fabric. So they're all Free Spirit fabrics, and they should be all available from the same dealers. So that's what I've used. I also used 3 meters of Kaffe Fassett's shot cotton. Now this shot cotton is basically, it looks grey from a distance, but when you get up close it has a little bit of shimmer to it, and that's because the warp and the weft of the fabric are made from 2 different colour threads. So up close they're actually blue one way and a browny colour the other way, but when it's together, woven together into the fabric, it looks like a beautiful grey colour. So that's what I've used. I used, as I said, about 3 meters, but if you want to use your background fabric for your outside border as well, then I would grab an extra 1/2 meter at least. So if you want to be safe, I would say 3.5 to 4 meters. If you're not going to use your background fabric for your border, then you'll only need about 3 meters. I also used a couple of Tulip Pink's Slow and Steady fabrics for my border. So I used almost a full 1/2 meter for those 2 fabrics, and you'll also need another 1/2 meter for your binding. So that's pretty much it. That's all you're going to need for the fabric side of things. A couple of other things you might need are some freezer paper. I've used freezer paper for my paper piece blocks, or my foundation piece blocks, and I really like the Reynolds brand. So if you can get a hold of that, you'll want a couple of meters of freezer paper. The other thing you'll need is a really good hot steam iron. You could use a spray bottle of water if you don't like putting water in your iron, but I tend to switch back and forth between using a dry iron and a steam iron. So get yourself a new one if you need to, but make sure it's nice and clean on the bottom. If you've got some old starch burnt on the bottom of your iron, what I like to do is just get a Chucks or some sort of rag, and I spray that with spray and wipe or any cleaning product. What I then do is turn the iron up as hot as it can get, and I'll iron that Chucks or the rag until all of the black comes off, and it comes off surprisingly quickly. So get a nice clean hot iron and a nice big ironing surface. I've got a really good wide ironing board, so I like to use my ironing board, but if you don't have a big ironing board, you can actually make yourself a little ironing surface. What I did for mine is I went to Bunnings and I got just a big sheet of MDF, and I got the boys at Bunnings to cut it up for me. You could get them to cut it into any size square that you want. And then what I did was I put just 1 layer of quilt batting on top of the MDF, and I put some nice fabric around it. And then I just hot glued it underneath. and that's given me a nice firm surface, which is really important when it comes to ironing. You want a firm surface, not a real soft, cushy surface. The other thing I did was I took my quilting ruler and I marked a line using a pencil. You could use a Sharpie if you like. But having a nice straight line on my ironing board is really helpful when it comes to pressing your blocks. I found that having that line made me much more accurate when I was ironing. A lot of times when we're piecing, we think that we've got a perfect seam, and we actually do. But when we come to iron that piece, that's when we run into trouble. By using the iron to push your fabric, it does stretch the fabric and it warps it out of shape. And it can be a huge difference. You could have a really nice straight piece of fabric when you first sew it, but when you iron it can make a huge difference. It can be almost, a couple of inches different by the time you press it. So having that line on the ironing board, it just makes me a bit more conscious of how careful I am when I iron. So I'd really recommend getting a nice big long straight line drawn onto your ironing surface. Another thing I'd suggest is giving your machine a really good clean out underneath. A story my mum told me once was she went to a sewing group and her friend said, I went to clean out my machine one day, but I didn't know where to get the replacement mat. There was like felt underneath the needle, and I didn't know where to get that felt piece from. So I just popped it back in the machine and left it at that. Now, as I'm sure you know, that felt mat was not meant to be there. That was just lint build up from all of her piecing work that had been felted because of the needle going through the machine. You want to get all the dust, all the thread, all the lint out from under your machine to get the best results. Wind yourself a couple of bobbins as well. We're just going to be using a neutral thread all the way through this quilt. So I like to use either a white or a cream or even a light grey. A light grey tends to blend in with pretty much everything. Another thing I found really invaluable when making this quilt was my AccuQuilt Go Cutter. Now for the very last row of the quilt, I used the clamshell die. Now it takes anything from a couple of minutes to hours to cut out some of your blocks sometimes. So by using the clamshell die, I was able to cut out all of the pieces I needed for this quilt in under 15 minutes. So really helpful to get this die if you have an AccuQuilt Go. If you don't have an AccuQuilt Go, get to a show and have a look at them, or your local dealer, because you will fall in love with the AccuQuilt Go. It's a fantastic tool. This is the 4-inch clamshell die, and that's the one I've used in this quilt. Another thing I wanted to mention was that we're not going to be working on this quilt in order, so we won't be going from top to bottom. The reason I've done that is because I wanted to spread out the more difficult techniques, mainly the foundation paper piecing. So I didn't want you to have to do 3 weeks in a row of foundation piecing. That's why I've mixed up the order a little bit. So I hope you stick with me. And when I put it back together, I found that I didn't like it in any other order. So that was how I pieced my quilt together. Now another thing you can do, which I love, is seeing how people use my designs and make it their own. So you don't have to make your quilt exactly the same as mine. I chose to do a row by row because I thought it might be easier when we come to the quilting stage to be able to do one row at a time. So that's how I put mine together, but you do get points for creativity. So if you come up with something different, I'd really love to see it. So that's about it for this week. I really hope that you get involved with the Slow and Steady Quilt Along. Head on over to the Facebook group and show us what fabric you're going to be using for the quilt along. I can't wait until next fortnight when I'll be showing you the very first row. For now, head on over to the Facebook page and join us, sharing what sort of fabric you're going to be using for your Slow and Steady quilt. Can't wait to see you there.